women's fertility declines really steeply around the age of 35. And we're still unpartnered. I thought I wanted kids, and it made me really anxious. So freezing these eggs is an opportunity to use sort of younger and maybe healthier eggs.
So it almost like freed you of this biological clock.
What happens to your eggs if you don't use them?
Do they expire?
I don't think so.
My name is Karishma. I'm a sexuality educator, and this is a series where we unlearn and relearn all those common myths, misconceptions, and questions which really should have been part of the talk. Hopefully we got it. Welcome to Talk You Never Got. Hi everyone, my name is Karishma. This is Talk You Never Got, and today we're with Dr. Billick, or to me, Max, and we're going to talk about egg freezing. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today, Max.
Thank you for having me.
This is a topic that I actually am learning so much about myself, and so I'm really excited to dive in. My first question is, tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
So I am an infectious disease doctor. So I'm trained in infectious disease and in internal medicine. I'm usually based out of Toronto, Canada. Although I'm doing my master's with Karishma this year in Boston. And a lot of the work that I've done over the years has touched upon gender equity, LGBTQ health, and sort of overall thoughts about like equity and behavior change and whatnot. Some of my most recent research is actually in the HIV prevention space. And I've done absolutely zero research in egg freezing, but a lot of advocacy around University of Toronto.
Yes, but also you have some experience.
I do. I have experience from doing it myself.
Yes, so Max has herself frozen her eggs, and so today she's speaking with us both as a doctor, but also as someone who's done this process and lived through it. But before we talk about egg freezing,
yes,
if sex were a food, what would it be and why?
Okay, so I was thinking about this one, and anyone who knows me well knows how much I love cheese. And so I was thinking about the similarities between sex and cheese. Not just that, like, sometimes it's a little smelly, just kidding. But the fact that, like, there's all different kinds of cheeses. There are mild cheeses. There are, like, really funky cheeses. Most people love cheese, but a few people don't like it so much. There's, like, different types of cheese, like cheese you eat at breakfast and cheese you have on a cheese plate. And again, to most people, it's really appealing, and to a handful, it's really repulsive.
And some people are lactose intolerant.
Yes. And so I thought about sort of that similarity.
Awesome. Cool. And what's one time in your life that you are like, damn, I wish that was part of the talk that you got?
Because I do infectious disease and take care of people with HIV, I think there's so much mystery around like how HIV is acquired and how it's spread and how you can prevent against it, and a lot of sort of mythology around that. And so I feel like I learned a lot of the details in a medical space when I wish that would be a little bit more like common knowledge.
What's the most common myth about HIV that you've come across?
Believe it or not, people still don't realize like what can spread it and what can't spread it. And I think that it's definitely growing, and like in gay men's communities here in North America, a lot of people know that like U equals U. So if someone's undetectable, they can't transmit HIV. But I think there's a lot of places in the world where like that might not be ingrained in the same way.
Cool. Yeah, and we have another episode where we spoke a little bit about HIV and prevention with Edgar as well. So If you haven't seen that, please check it out. And now let's get to egg freezing. What even is egg freezing? Because I just think about like literally eggs in a freezer, and I don't know anything beyond that. So yeah, tell me.
So it's not the freezer that you have in the room over there, but it's a procedure that people with ovaries can go through to stimulate an increased number of like eggs to be ready at a certain time. We can talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And that stimulation is usually done with different hormones prescribed by a doctor. The doctors are able to take all of the eggs that are ready and then put them in a special freezer at a medical facility to keep them for later use. Most of the reasons sort of why people do it commercially or like will choose to freeze their eggs is, if they're not partnered or they think they might want kids down the road and they want to sort of save eggs from a younger them to be able to use. And that brings me to my next point, which is usually women's fertility starts to decline around 35 years old. And so people in a lot of high pressured professions like medicine, like people who are lawyers, maybe people in government, people who are in school forever, like me, you know, might not be ready to have kids at the time when their fertility is at its peak. And so freezing these eggs is an opportunity to use sort of younger and maybe healthier eggs, like a more robust egg supply. The thing that I mentioned is like, how does it work? So there's different types of ways that fertility clinics can freeze eggs, and they're sort of flash frozen. So they're exposed to really, really, really cold temperatures, so they freeze very quickly. So it would be different than, for example, just sticking them in
So you can't
the
store
freezer.
them in your freezer. Someone did ask, where are they stored? So they're stored in a professional facility of some sort.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and usually those facilities will have like multiple layers of backup, so they'll have like generators in case the electricity goes out. And in that same facility, when someone is ready to try and have a baby, they'll thaw the egg, they'll inseminate it, so put sperm inside it to make an embryo.
Got it. So basically, you don't need to have a partner when you do this process. You don't need sperm. This is just you taking your eggs out and putting it into the frozen environment.
That's a great question. Yeah, so a lot of people will freeze their eggs because they know or they think they want kids, but they're not ready to have it in that moment, and they might not have a partner in that moment.
So tell us about the difference between egg freezing and IVF.
So egg freezing is you harvest someone's eggs, or you take someone's eggs, and they're just stored in a medical grade freezer.
No sperm.
No sperm, just solo YOLO. IVF is the process of that same process of getting those eggs, retrieving those eggs, and then taking someone's sperm, and then I don't know how they actually do it, I think it's in a petri dish, but in their various mechanisms, they put the two together, right?
Yeah.
They put the sperm and the egg, and it creates an embryo. And they let it divide several times. And then that embryo, you know, they can put back into a woman or someone with a uterus. And that process is called in vitro fertilization. That is IVF, when you put it back into the person, or you create the embryo and you put it back into the person.
Yeah.
Now, you can freeze eggs alone. You can freeze embryos, so sperm and egg together. And you can freeze sperm alone, actually. As well.
Cool.
You know, I have a friend, for example, who knows that she's a carrier for like a gene that she wouldn't want in her kid. So they're able to freeze the embryos and do special testing on them to make sure that the one that's transferred doesn't have that deadly or deleterious gene.
Actually, let's talk about this a little bit. Your friend did it because of the genetic reasons, right? Like she was worried about passing on a gene.
Yeah.
What was your reason?
So I did a year of obstetrics and gynecology as a resident, so training to be, you know, full doctor. Realized it wasn't really for me, and I decided to transfer to internal medicine. But in that year, I learned that women's fertility declines really steeply around the age of 35. And at the age of 33, 34, I was still unpartnered. Like, I wasn't really dating anyone seriously. I thought I wanted kids, or I knew I wanted kids. And it made me really anxious to think about, like, dating, to meet someone, to have kids. Like, I didn't want all of that pressure. So those were sort of like the two things that pushed me into thinking that I might want to freeze my eggs.
So it almost like freed you of this biological clock that I feel like really pushes people to get married early or to find partners and stuff like that, almost to a point where it becomes worrying, you know, where you're like, you want kids, but then you are also prioritizing your career and you wanted to continue through your rounds of medical school and all of that, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I am of two minds of this, and I still sometimes wrestle with it. So, like, I felt a huge relief of anxiety after I froze my eggs. What, for me, felt like a ticking time bomb or whatever was, like, a little bit of relief. And I would joke to my friends, like, I'm either going to spend this money in freezing my eggs or in therapy down the road if I can't have a kid, so, like, may as well put it to this now, which is, like, a little bit of a cynical approach, and I recognize that. But it was sort of my way of coping with it, I think.
Yeah.
You know, I also have trouble with the idea of, like, this is not a perfect insurance policy and it's not a guarantee. Like, there are people who might be too old to carry a child. There might be people who, for other reasons, can't, you know, carry a child. I have a different friend who has gone through like multiple rounds of fertility treatments in different ways and has had a lot of trouble. And she was the one who actually brought it up to me, being like, I don't know if all of this like discussion about it being an insurance policy really reflects people's lived experience. So I don't want to say that like you freeze your eggs, you can definitely use them, all is good.
Yeah.
But for me, recognizing the trade-offs, it worked for me in that moment.
Yeah. So what is the usual success rate of such a procedure?
So, complicated question, and I would direct people to a fertility specialist to get sort of firm answers, because a lot of that has to do with the age of the person when they freeze their eggs, the number of eggs that are frozen, medical issues, or like what we call in the medical world comorbidities. And as people get over the age of 35, the success rate of having a live pregnancy decreases. But they usually say, and you might have the numbers exactly, but I think it's like if they're frozen around the age of 35 and you have 15 eggs frozen, the chance of a single live birth is like over 50%. I think it's closer to like 60 or 70.
Yeah.
And then it declines with increasing age of the eggs.
I do have here, I did some research and it said that women under 35 have a higher success rate of beyond like 90% if they freeze and store their eggs. Yeah. So
and that's the age when they were frozen,
yes,
not the age when they use them.
Yeah.
Right?
So, yeah. That makes sense. I remember this from biology class. We have like a stored number of eggs we are born with. And then through this process, each cycle would pull out like 10 to 15, or that's total.
So the number of eggs retrieved can vary wildly. I have heard stories of only 3 eggs being retrieved in someone who otherwise seemed healthy. One of my good friends, same age as me, I think that she'd be comfortable with me sharing, went through it and only got 9 eggs. I know people who've gotten 25 eggs from a single cycle. I think they usually quote, if you're around 35, that you'll get between like 12 to 18 or 12 to 20. But again, it might be different depending on the clinic and depending on and whatnot.
Interesting.
So
yeah.
Some people will choose to do multiple cycles, not just one,
right,
to get a number that statistically will give them a live birth.
Yeah. So I'm hearing a few different things here. Age is important. Under 35 is ideal. Is there like an age you can be too young?
So fertility clinics around the world, from just talking to friends, like this is nothing medical, scientific, whatever, really, really vary in terms of like quality and how predatory they are. And so I think it's important to like get reviews, to talk to people, to really sort of like open up this space in terms of like what's an appropriate clinic that you feel comfortable with and connected to the provider. And I say that because I've heard people say, you should freeze your eggs as young as possible. And like, that's not reasonable. Like, you don't need to freeze your eggs at 18 or 20 years old because they're the best eggs ever. Because the chance of you meeting someone who you want to have kids with by the time you're 30 is very likely, right? And so it's a trade-off in terms of being young and having good quality eggs and being older and not having quite as good quality eggs. And so the numbers or the ages that I've heard quoted, and again, this is like in the Canadian context, is like maybe between the ages of 30 to 34, start thinking about it. If you're serious about wanting to freeze eggs, like it's good to freeze them by the age of 35. If you're older than 35, there's certain tests that they can do to sort of look at what the egg reserve is, or a suggestion of the egg reserve. If you know you want kids and you're 35 and you're single, go ahead and freeze them if you have the means. There's a lot of variables, so I'd encourage people to talk to their providers.
Yeah. The other thing that I think a lot of people were curious about is what are the side effects of the process?
So for me, usually the way that it starts is like with, you talk to a doctor and they like take your medical history, and then there's a few tests that they do, both blood tests to look at your ovarian reserve, and then also usually they do an ultrasound, or at least in my experience in Canada and North America, to look at your ovaries and to look at your uterus and to make sure that there's like, nothing, no anatomical, no like physical issues there. They were like, we can go like after your next cycle or like tomorrow, but I was like, no, my timing's not great. So the nice thing about it is a lot of times you have a bit of a say in terms of the timing that might work for you. There's different ways of doing what you call the stimulation or the stim. And I will not profess to know like all of the details. That is something that people should talk to their doctors about. But there's longer courses and shorter courses.
So that's the period that you're taking hormones?
That's the period that you're taking hormones, and you're injecting yourself.
Okay.
Pretty simple. I know that's easy for me to say as a doctor because I give injections not infrequently, but it is quite simple. And usually you inject it sort of into your belly. Some people will do it into their thighs. And for me, it was different injections over the course of about 8 or 9 days.
Okay.
I had a friend in the UK who had a much longer course where she did like 18 or 20 days.
Okay.
I went straight from being on the pill to stopping and doing the injections. Other clinics will want you to have a period after going off of hormonal contraception. So again, it differs a little bit. So it was 2 injections at various points that they told me to give them. And then I only had to go back a couple of times for an ultrasound. They used to do like daily ultrasounds, and then they were able to space it out during COVID, and they saw that the rates of the number of eggs that they were able to retrieve were just as good.
Yeah.
So they sort of have lessened it, at least in a lot of the clinics around where I live. And then when they like deem it's right, you give yourself what's called a trigger injection. And that trigger injection causes the eggs to mature. Give yourself a trigger injection, and then you go into the clinic about 36 hours later for the retrieval. The retrieval is like very funny. I've never had like elective surgery before really, but you know, you go in, you like get into your coat and they like try and make it sort of comfy. And the way that they do it is they actually have one of those ultrasounds that goes inside the vagina. So it kind of looks like a dildo or like a
transvaginal.
Transvaginal ultrasound. Except there's a little probe at the bottom. And they go into the back portion of the vaginal canal.
Does it hurt?
And they go and they suck out the eggs.
That sounds so strange.
So, does it hurt? Mixed question. They gave me lots of meds. Okay. So, I knew it hurt, but I didn't care.
So, it hurt a little bit?
It hurt. It hurt a fair bit, but because you're on meds, like, you kind of forget that it hurt, if that makes sense.
Weird.
I won't say it didn't hurt, but it was kind of short-term pain. You know, when it stopped, it didn't hurt as much. It was like a really, really strong period cramp with a sharp pain that was quickly relieved in the moment.
Okay.
For most people, that's the worst part, and then it just goes away. I know people who've gone to work the next day.
That's awesome.
But what are the side effects? So we'll get into that. They retrieved a fair number of eggs from me, which was like great news at the time. But what they didn't tell me is people who tend to have a higher egg count tend to have more symptoms.
Oh.
Because every single one of those little ova or whatever follicles is making a bunch of hormones in addition to the hormones you give them yourself. And so I felt okay that day. I felt okay like that evening. And then intermittently for about the next 7 days or so, I had like the worst period cramps I've ever had in my life. Like waking me up from sleep. Luckily, I had like a job that I could do some from home at the time. It was COVID, so like there's a lot of permission to work from home. I had a little couch in my office, and sometimes I had to take like a half hour and lie on the couch. And I was nervous that it wasn't going to go away. And when I had the follow-up appointment with my doctor, she said, "Oh, I think you probably had a little bit of OHSS."
What is
that?
OHSS?
What is OHSS? So it's Ovarian Hyperstimulation Syndrome.
Oh.
And so it can be as mild as what I had, just really terrible, shitty cramps, to as bad as like having fluid on the lungs and extra fluid in the belly and like significant leg swelling. Happens really, really infrequently to like a serious degree, but if a lot of eggs are retrieved, it could be a side effect. And most people, apart from like the procedure itself, don't have a ton of side effects.
Okay, that's good to hear. And you don't regret the procedure because of the side effects?
No, absolutely not. Like, I would do it again. I just wish I had known, because I was like, is something wrong? And then when I told her, she was like, oh, no, it's normal.
Yeah.
So,
what about, like, mental health side effects?
You know, when you're going to pump your body full of hormones, similar to, like, right before your period, there might be, you know, like, a bit of fluctuation, let's say. And I think it really depends on the individual person. Like, if you're someone who's very sensitive to your period hormones. When you're injecting yourself and you are like a bit bloated because of it and, you know, have lots of hormones in your system, you might feel that heightened emotion. I felt a huge relief after freezing my eggs, and I felt like a big anxiety lifted. And so I think for people that's a bit of a trade-off. Like, there's a lot of mental health things that can happen. And so for me, it was no worse than like a period.
Yeah, that's good to know. And so how long was the process from the start to the finish?
For me, it was about 10 days, 10 or 11 days from starting the injections. I think I started the injections, I did 7 or 8 days of injections, then the trigger, 2 more days, and then they retrieved the eggs. My friend in the UK had a longer stimulation, and so hers was about 21 days, like 3 weeks.
Gotcha. So the length kind of depends on your specific medical situation.
Yeah.
That's helpful to know. Let's come to the $1 million question, which is the dollar question. How much does it cost? And I think cost is the biggest barrier for people in terms of, because like everyone would be freezing their, not everyone, but a lot more people would be freezing their eggs if it wasn't for cost. So let's talk cost in your experience, and then I'll also share a little bit.
I think cost is a huge barrier, you know, especially considering the people who have pioneered freezing their eggs. A lot of times it was like women in high-powered, well-paying jobs that can historically, at least in Canada and the US and the UK, be like discriminatory, right? Or there are limitations to who has access. But for me, as I mentioned, the timing was right because I had great insurance through my residency that covered pretty much all medication.
This was in Canada.
In Canada,
yeah.
And so when I shopped around to a few different clinics, they quoted me anywhere from like $5,000 or $6,000 to up to $12,000 to $15,000.
That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I know that in the States it can go up to $20,000. In the UK it can be quite expensive as well. And so the medication cost is going to depend on how much medication you need to stimulate your personal, my personal, each person's personal situation. I think mine was probably about $3,000 to $4,000.
Okay.
So that was great.
Yeah.
And then the procedure itself cost about $4,500 or $5,000. And then important things not to forget is you have to pay to store the eggs. So there's usually an annual fee. Somewhere, the places I've heard of, again in Canada, are about $500 a year. I imagine it would be less elsewhere, and maybe more elsewhere.
Yeah.
And then you can't just take those eggs and sort of pop them back into your belly. You need to use them. So you need to pay to do IVF, or in vitro fertilization. And that can range from $8,000 to $20,000 a cycle.
Okay. It's a lot cheaper in India. So don't, if you're watching this and you're like, oh my God, that's a lot of money. If you convert it to rupees, it doesn't scale in the same way. So that's the bonus. But I think like by the standards of Indian medical procedures, it's still pretty expensive. And so the numbers I found were quite a big range. I think like some of the numbers I found were anywhere from 50,000 to 150,000 in INR. So that's like the lower end is less than 1,000.
That's great.
Yeah. I think it also slightly depends on where you get it. So to your point about like finding the right IVF clinic and stuff like that, and fertility clinics, but also most big cities definitely offer it. So Mumbai, Bangalore, Delhi, Chennai, Hyderabad, and so on, you will find clinics that do it. And there's, like I said, a big variation. And some of them even said like 1.5 lakhs to 3.5 lakhs. So you'll find that range for egg retrieval and freezing. And then for storage and long-term storage fees, I found a range of anywhere between 5,000 to 20,000 annually. So that's the recurring every year cost that you would have to pay, which is a lot less than these costs. But then I think the difference in India is we don't have insurance covering it usually. And there's no other financing mechanisms offered to us right now. I think maybe there's like tests for fertility that might be covered, but not usually. And then the other interesting thing that I've come across in the US is that now there's startups who are offering partial financing mechanisms. So what they do is they go like, well, if you harvest your eggs, you can have someone pay for the entire process, but then you have to donate half your eggs to the family that's paying.
Oh, interesting.
Right. Yeah. So kind of to incentivize young people who may not have the budget but might be in the right age window. And so a lot of people can then avail of that for like, donate half your eggs, you get to keep half of them, but then someone else pays for everything. So just another interesting model.
Ethical questions.
So many questions.
Right? And like so many gray spaces. Like I know that, I don't know if you want to get to this now, but I know someone asked like, what happens to your eggs if you don't use them?
Yeah, what happens?
So when I decide that I don't want to keep paying for them, or I've used them to have a baby or whatever, I can choose to destroy them, or I can choose to donate them to science. And I believe you can also choose to donate them to an individual, like as you were saying, like to be able to use them if they can't, if their eggs, they can't use their eggs for whatever reason.
Do they expire?
I don't think so. You know, like the ages between when you freeze them and like when you would use them, let's say the earliest you would freeze them is 30 and the latest you would use them is 50. You know, I think you can keep them frozen for 20 years. I don't know if they degrade. I knew that if I froze my eggs at 34, I would use them in the next 15 years, and they will be kept for the next 15 years.
That makes sense. With that, I come to the rapid fire round. Are you ready?
Yes.
Cool. So quick answers, whatever comes to mind. So what's one thing you wish someone had told you before you did it?
Just those cramps, they really sucked, and I wish that someone had told me how much that part was gonna hurt, but also most people don't have that. So it would have been a nice heads up for me.
That's valid. What's one big myth about egg freezing?
This idea that like if you freeze your eggs, you will be able to have a child is myth.
Okay, makes sense. And what is one sexual health resource that you rely on?
Well, I used to really like the CDC website. They've changed it recently. So I also like PHAC, which is the Canadian Public Health website, to like think about like STIs and symptoms and whatnot and like how to treat things. Not really like the sexiest website. I'm sure you have like better resources for me.
But it's user friendly and
it's quite
anyone can use it.
And you know it's reliable because it's like medical and evidence-based.
Yeah, that's awesome. I also found when I was researching for this video, I found that there are, in India especially, some of the newer age startups and health clinics that have written articles about specifically egg freezing in India. One of them was Proactive for her. They have clinics in Bangalore. This is not sponsored. And the other one is Arva Health. I'll drop these names in the caption as well. But yeah, check them out. They might have a different, more modern, newer outlook. Thank you so much, Max, for taking the time to be here.
My pleasure.
Any last words before we close?
I think that I would really love to hammer home like how, for me, and it's not the same for everyone, but like for me, how much it gives me peace of mind to know that those eggs from a younger me are frozen if and when I choose to use them, you know, and I always sort of, whenever I tell this story, and I haven't mentioned it yet, I always say that like, you know, it was like the depths of the pandemic, I froze my eggs, I felt like so alone at that moment in time, and then I ended up meeting my partner about 6 months later, not even, like 5 months later, who I'm now married to, and I've been dating like a lot, and I don't think that was necessarily a coincidence. I think in some ways it allowed me to sort of relax a little bit and open myself up to people in ways that I maybe hadn't been able to before that. Not to say that everybody will meet their partner after they freeze their eggs, but for me, I was feeling so much angst around it that it really was able to give me peace of mind.
No, I think that's really important, that this is such a personal decision, and sometimes like that is the mental health load that is lifted from you. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time today, Max.
My pleasure.
And thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Please, if you like this video, give us a like, follow, subscribe. Check us out across platforms at Talk You Never Got. And thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Before you get a vasectomy, you should just see how long you can go.
What's one thing you wish someone had told you before you got the vasectomy?
Doctor told me that I had to wait 14 days for any sexual activity, including masturbation, just no ejaculating.